Nice place you've got here. I may be the only rabbi in the world, and certainly I am the only rabbi over 40 in the world who is beginning his Kol Nidre sermon with Olivia Rodrigo. Now, if you don't know who Olivia Rodrigo is, that's actually the point. A couple of weeks ago, I read an article about Olivia Rodrigo, who is a 20-year-old whose first album won Grammys and was very popular, and this was her second album. And in the article, I was struck by a line that said, "My musical inspiration was Taylor Swift." I spoke to my daughter and I said, "Do you know who Olivia Rodrigo is?" She said, "Of course I do." I said, "I just read this line about Taylor Swift and I don't understand. Taylor Swift is so young. How could she be old enough to be someone else's musical inspiration?" And my daughter said, "Dad, that's how you should begin your sermon on aging." Then I spoke to my younger brother, who is a rabbi in New York, and I said to him, "I'm going to do my high holiday sermon, my Kol Nidre sermon about aging." And he said, "Oh, I did that on Rosh Hashanah." And I thought, when your younger brother gives a sermon about growing older, you're old. And he told me what my father said to him. My father said, "You know, every morning an 18-year-old gets up and looks in the mirror and has the face of an 80-year-old. So this past week, I celebrated my 65th birthday. Yes, this sermon is, oh, thank you. This sermon is being sponsored by Social Security. And all those memes on the internet, "You're old if you remember this," I remember everything. I know that most people under 40, maybe under 50, don't know what CC really stands for. But not only do I know what it means, but I used to get the ink from carbon copies on my hands when I was young, and so did some of you. When someone says to me, "You haven't changed a bit," I know they are either nearsighted, have amnesia, or are being way too nice. I identify with that T-shirt that said, "It's weird being the same age as old people." But that's because youth has changed. We live in a culture that treasures it, and it does so for more reasons than social or sexual vitality. It also does it because we are the first generation where young people have vital life skills that older people don't. That wasn't true in an industrial age or an agricultural age, but it is true in a technological age. I remember Watergate, but I don't know how to work my computer. But young people do. And so the attempt to look younger dominates our culture. Not only surgery and other technologies intended to reduce aging, not only the constant pushing of exercise and diet regimes intended to take years off your age, but even in the way older people dress and act. When I was young, a grown man would never wear jeans. Wouldn't do it. That's not how old people dress. But now those distinctions have been collapsed, and maturity and wisdom are less treasured in old people. We hear all the time, age is just a number. You can be young at any age. But if I showed you a picture of a 10-year-old and a 70-year-old, you wouldn't say age is just a number. It's not. It is a life marker. And while we don't have to be delighted with everything it brings, we can learn to deal with it in significant ways. According to our tradition, Abraham was the first one who merited looking old. Think about that. That was how the rabbis described it. He merited. It was a good thing. We don't think that way. I've said this to you before, but this is my complaint about LA. I still love LA, still coming back to LA, but this is my complaint about LA. There's no autumn here. The leaves stay green. So that means that the model we have is spring, 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 till you die. So you're supposed to be 20 forever, and then you're done. But the colors of autumn, they're beautiful. It reminds me of that poem by Jenny Joseph, which many of you may know. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. The idea of growing old and finding it as a release and a joy, that's not how we think about it. We think of it as a fault and a shame. But our tradition didn't see growing old that way. The Torah tells us just yesterday, in the portion that we read, Zechor yemot olam she'al avicha v'yagedcha. Ask about what happened in the past. Your parents and your elders, they will tell you. There was a memory and a continuity and an insight that youth doesn't have and can't have. And there's also a letting go. That's part of the wonder and beauty of life. As many of you know, when I stepped down as senior rabbi, I gave away thousands of books. Some of those books were the companions of decades. They were precious to me, and it was beautiful to see them go. It was a wonderful thing. It doesn't mean when you're old that all of a sudden your creativity ends. Verdi composed operas into his 80s. Grandma Moses painted into her 80s. Thomas Mann wrote epical novels in his 70s. Picasso was painting masterpieces in his 90s. Or listen to Carl Jung. A human being would certainly not grow to be 70 or 80 years old if this longevity had no meaning for the species. But unfortunately, even those geniuses aside, we forget that age isn't about what you can produce, but who you are and what you can give. Viktor Frankl points out in Man's Search for Meaning that the good thing about being old is no one can take away what you have done. When you're young, you're so uncertain. You don't know what life will bring. But when you're old, you can look back and say, I did that. I was there. I saw that. I experienced that. I lived that. That's mine. That's why the rabbis tell us that luchot v'shivrei luchot munachim ba'aron, that the tablets of the law and the shattered tablets, the one that Moses broke, they traveled together in the ark. They said, so when someone is older and no longer what they once were, they're just as deserving of honor. As we get older, we can be someone who sums up the human experience, who no longer needs to manipulate the world or conquer the world, but can appreciate it and understand it. Someone for whom the puzzle of life isn't solved, but it's bigger, it's expanded, you see more. Thinking about this sermon, I read a book by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi called From Aging to Saging. And in it, he quotes a psychiatrist, John Weir Perry. And this is what he said: in our later years, we feel connected to the world through bonds of tenderness and empathy. Life becomes more poetic. The ordinary objects that surround us, trees, houses, clouds, animals, shimmer with metaphoric insight, revealing depths of meaning that normally elude us. We may relate to a tree in the backyard as the tree of life, rooted in the eternal truth of life. The blossoming in spring may remind us of renewal taking place in our psyches. When we look at the world through the aspect of eternity, life is animated in ways that astound us. That's why the Torah says, Mipnei Sevat Hakum, that you should rise before the aged. And in a total rebuke to almost our entire culture, Proverbs says that gray hair is a crown of splendor. It's true. That's not the way most of us look at it, but we who are older can offer a corrective. We can ask ourselves each morning what the service asks us in the Shacharit service. Why are we here? Why are we here? Most of us say it is to grow into ourselves, but you realize that when you're younger, you're so focused on how others see you that it is hard to grow into yourself. But as you get older, you get to not care so much what others think. You get to wear purple and a hat that doesn't go. So we can be self-possessed, calmer. But it isn't only what we can be. It's also what we can teach. In the Talmud, Rava wants to know what amazing things Rav Huna, who was a great Talmudic sage, did in his life. So he says to Rav Bar Papa, let the master tell us of some of the deeds that Rav Huna performed. And this is the answer that Rav Bar Papa gives. He says, Biyankute lo dichirna, besevute dichirna. I don't remember what he did when he was young, but I will never forget what he did when he was old. How many of us carry memories of what our grandparents did that we will never forget because they were old? I haven't done it yet, but I hope in this year in Boston to go to Fenway Park. And the reason I want to go is not just to see a baseball game, but because I've only been there once when I was a little kid and my Zeta took me, my grandfather, and I will never forget it because I remember what he did when he was old and what it meant. Think of those portraits of Rembrandt that we all stare at in the museums. Think of what they mean, the wisdom in those aged faces and the beauty. Yes, the beauty in those aged faces. For old people, writes Ursula Le Guin in an essay on old age, beauty doesn't come with hormones the way it does with the young. It has to do with bones. It has to do with who the person is. More and more clearly, she writes, it has to do with what shines through those gnarly faces and bodies. It is, she says, not skin deep, but life deep. We have unique lives, experiences that are special to us alone, and most importantly perhaps, it is generally the old who have the privilege of teaching others what it is to die. We can't fool ourselves. Those aches and pains, the lack of sleeping through the night, the constant nasty surprises that your body plays on you, that's the flickering of the lights in the lobby before the final act. To learn how to die is what this day is about. It's why we fast and we're not supposed to bathe and we're supposed to wear things that look like shrouds because, after all, mi yichyeh u'mi yamut, who will live and who will die. Most of the time, it is the old who have the privilege. Not always, not always. As many of you know, just a month ago, we got a master class in how to die from Mark Becker, who was only 37 years old when a brain tumor took him. But he died with grace and words of love whispered in his final moments, with no recriminations of God or of others, with tenderness in his heart and love on his lips. Because sometimes you reach the peak without the years to help you. As the naturalist writer Nan Shepherd said, to aim for the highest point is not the only way to climb the mountain. Every age has its changes and its challenges, its limitations, and its losses. The young cannot see the old because they haven't been there. But the old often can't see the young for who they are either, because the backward gaze is filmy and shaped by one's own memories and longings. I will never forget my father telling me that there was no one left alive to call him Yingala, little boy, which was his name all through his childhood. But one by one, everybody who shaped his life has left the stage. Do we remember? We remember, although a lot has changed. Wordsworth, looking out over Tintern Abbey, said, "I cannot paint what then I was. Even when you're older, you remember your youth, but it's still at a distance. That time is past," he writes, "and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures." We change. Don't let the thrilling cacophony of youth, though, as wonderful as it is, as scary, as vertiginous, as worrisome, as promising as it is, don't let it prevent you from hearing the still, subtle music of age. We are not what we were, but we are what we are. The soul is timeless, and when the body is tired and worn and sated with life, we will return it as our ancestors have before, grateful for what we've been given, blessed in years and wonder, sentinels who leave our posts to be taken up by those who come after.